Hey everyone, it's Emily and I'm here for my second video of Bookmas, and it's going to be the second part of my November wrap up, and I have a lot of books to talk about, so I'm just going to jump right in. I'm going to talk about the first two together because they're in a series. So I listened on audio to the entirety of Full Moon and listened to about half of Grave Peril by Jim Butcher. So this is book 2 and 3 in the Dresden Files series. So this follows a wizard. It's an urban fantasy. Follows a wizard named Harry Dresden who lives in Chicago and helps the Chicago PD solve paranormal mysteries, basically. So as the title Full Moon might suggest, this one deals with werewolves, and this one deals with essentially the spirit world kind of going haywire. Dreams are involved, and the spirit world is interacting with people through their dreams, and basically there's more ghost activity than normal. Anyway, so Harry is a wizard who helps Chicago PD figure out what's going on when people in Chicago are ultimately affected by these paranormal activities. And so I read the first one a while ago and remember enjoying it, and picked up the audiobooks for these. They were on Libby and decided to just continue on with the series. I think I picked up both of these at library book sales, so not too much money invested here. But as I was listening, I started to get really pissed off with how he was describing female characters, or how he was writing female characters, because almost every single female character is basically only described by her breast and waist size, and that's who she is. And almost none of the female characters are at all three-dimensional, and most of them don't really go beyond like physical descriptions and really kind of develop a personality or kind of become anything other than just an attractive body. And that just really rubbed me the wrong way. And it got to the point, so I listened to the entirety of this one and was half-ish way through this one, and it got to the point where I just thought to myself, if he introduces another female character that way one more time, I'm just DNFing, because they ultimately, to me, weren't entertaining enough to overcome the annoyance. I mean, I can have some problematic things about books, and maybe there are other things that I like about it that keep me listening to it or keep me reading it, even if there are some things I don't like about it. But these weren't entertaining enough to me to kind of overcome how annoyed I was with how he was writing female characters. And sure enough, a few chapters later, another character is introduced and described by her tiny waist, her long slender legs, and her perfect breasts, and I was like, alright, I'm done. This is obnoxious. Like, don't get me wrong, I have no problem with characters being physically attractive, and I don't have a problem with characters being attracted to each other. That's fine. That's great. But if that consistently is the only way that only female characters are described, then I kind of have a problem with that. And so, yeah, when that next character was introduced and was described that way, I just was like, you know what? Life is too short. Life is too short to listen to audiobooks and read books that you're just not enjoying. So I DNF'd. If you've read that series and you know that things kind of get better as the series goes along, let me know. I know these were written a while ago, but that still doesn't necessarily mean that I want to listen to books like that. So, yeah, I DNF'd and don't really plan on continuing with it. Next book that I read or listened to was Sorted by Jackson Bird. So Jackson is someone that I knew in high school, and he is a trans man. He has a YouTube channel and talks about trans rights, and has a memoir and just kind of talks about you know, discovering that he's a trans man and what that transition was like, and it was a fascinating book. It was funny, it was smart, it was witty, it was super educational, and I had a great time listening to it and reading it. So Jackson narrates the audiobook, and there are tidbits and there are kind of sidebars in here that aren't included in the audiobook. So it was good to be able to go back to the physical book for some of those sidebars and additional information. But I would highly recommend. This was such an entertaining, heartwarming, heartbreaking, interesting book, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it and would highly recommend if you are looking for a trans memoir from a really badass person. I also listened to Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, and I listened to this on audio because it is narrated by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and he is just wonderful at all things, including narrating. This is actually one of the few books that he has narrated, and so I had to listen to it on audio, and I loved every second of this book. So this book follows Ari, or Aristotle, and him meeting and befriending Dante, and their families becoming friends, and you know how their families connect, and just them going through life things together. And I don't want to talk about a lot of the stuff that happens between their families, but it's just about, you know, them dealing with life and dealing with life together, and the hard things that they go through, the hard things they went through in their families kind of before they met, the hard things they go through as, you know, as friends and as people who care about each other, and as their friendship grows deeper and deeper, kind of what that means for them. And it's just everything. Like, I can see myself rereading this book over and over and over again and listening to it, but also I want to reread it physically and annotate, because there are just so many nuggets of incredible wisdom in here. The writing style is also very unique, so it's short, concise, to the point sentences that actually really work for the story and the storytelling. And so I really love the writing style. I think it worked really well, and it was just such a beautiful story. Oh my god, I was so emotional listening to this. Yeah, it just made me super emotional just thinking about stuff that my family has gone through, and just kind of remembering how precious life is and how precious the people who are important to us are, and just valuing that time and valuing that connection to those people that we care about. I loved it, and I'm gonna keep this thing forever and cherish this book forever. I also listened to Ash Princess by Laura Sebastian, and this gave me Red Queen vibes so much. So this follows Theodosia, or Theo, and when she was a young girl, so she's the princess of her people. Her mother is the queen. And when she was young, her mother was actually murdered by another, you know, group of people who were trying to take over their land. And so, you know, her mother's killed, but she is actually kind of held prisoner in the palace that she grew up in with these new people who have taken over. And she is called the Ash Princess. And whenever her people try to rebel against the people who have kind of conquered their land, she is publicly punished for those acts of rebellion by her people. And so something happens at the beginning of the book that essentially is her last straw. So it follows her some years later, and you know, something happens and it's her final straw, and she decides that she's going to do whatever she can to escape her situation and help her people. And it's, you know, about that process and about her trying to find who she can trust, and how she can kind of escape her situation while still being in a position to help her people. And, you know, it was entertaining. I actually really enjoyed the audiobook. As I said, it gave me major Red Queen vibes, and so many of the same tropes and themes that are in Red Queen are in here. But it was entertaining. Honestly, I enjoyed listening to it, and it's not anything super new. It's not anything that, you know, blew my mind. You know, it is a pretty tropey YA book, but it was still entertaining enough to me that I am definitely looking forward to continuing on in the series. The second one is out, and I think the third one comes out next year, I think. So, yeah, I mean, will I reread the series a million times and it be a new favorite series? Probably not, but, you know, it was interesting and fun, and yeah. So I also read The Toll by Neil Shuster, and this is the third and final book in the Arc of the Scythe series. I've talked about this series so many times because it is so great. The first book is Scythe. It follows a world where humanity has conquered death and no one dies by natural causes, but we haven't left Earth, so we still have a finite number of resources, and so there is a group of scythes, or the scythedom, who have been sanctioned to glean or kill people to keep the population in check. And the scythes are the one group that are not kind of controlled or under the influence of this AI intelligence called the Thunderhead. And so it's about scythe politics, and it's about how people interact with the Thunderhead and scythes, and how scythes interact with other people and kind of interact at a distance with the Thunderhead. And just shenanigans ensues, and this is a continuation from what happened at the end of book 2 that had everyone reeling, including me. So it picks up a little while after the events of book 2 and kind of the fallout from that. And yeah, so I can't really talk too much about the plot of this because I don't want to spoil anything in the previous books, but I really, really enjoyed this a lot. And I can definitely see why some people might not enjoy the ending. I can definitely see it. I enjoyed it, but I can definitely see why people might not like a few of the major kind of plot directions in this book and ultimately the ending. But I liked it. I liked it a lot, and I am definitely going to be rereading this series. So I listened to the audiobook of Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. It follows a girl named Miriam, and her father is a moneylender, but he's a very, very poor moneylender. He's not very good at his job, and his family basically doesn't have enough food and doesn't have enough resources and just really is struggling to survive. And so Miriam essentially takes matters into her own hands and starts to run more and more of her father's business. And she is essentially much stricter about people paying back their money than her father was. And so her family is doing a little bit better, and in the process of kind of paying back debts, one family essentially has their daughter work for this family to pay off part of their debt. And in the process of, you know, this happening, there are these creatures that live in this world who kind of hear of this woman who can turn silver into gold. And in the context of what she's doing, she's essentially just, in terms of business, she is increasing the business and turning silver coins into gold, so to speak. But these creatures hear of her and kind of give her a test, and they ask her, they basically threaten her, not ask, they threaten her and have her turn some of their silver coins into gold. So once she successfully does that, they take her back to where they live, and the rest of the book kind of follows her in that land and how the people in that land interact with where she's from, and just complicated politics ensues. And it's kind of hard to describe the plot of this, but I loved this. The audiobook was incredible, for one, but the writing style is so good. It's a really, really good combination of plot moving stuff forward at a good pace, but also character development. And well, one, just the atmosphere of this book is incredible. This was a really good time to read this book. Would recommend reading this in the winter because it's kind of set in the winter and kind of set in cold times, and the place that she's taken to is kind of this icy, cold land. So would recommend in the winter. But oh my gosh, it was so good. I love the writing so much. I love the atmosphere. The characters are so great. And I just had such a blast reading this, and I know that I'm going to reread this probably many times because I just had such a good time reading this. So I also read, this is the Fairy Loot edition of The Beautiful by Renee Audier. They had some custom artwork on the dust jacket, and so I reversed it. Just because, I mean, the cover is gorgeous, but I also like the artwork. So this is one that is kind of making the rounds on BookTube, but it follows Celine, and she is fleeing Paris. It's 1870s, and she's fleeing Paris and makes her way to New Orleans, and you know, she's escaping a mysterious past that she's afraid will come back to haunt her. And she, through circumstances, kind of gets caught up in the underworld of New Orleans, kind of in a paranormal sense. So she kind of gets caught up in the paranormal underworld of New Orleans and meets some interesting characters along the way, and there's a murder mystery because there are multiple people around her dying, and she's trying to figure out what's going on and whether or not these mysterious people are part of that. And, you know, I thought this was pretty entertaining. It's not the greatest thing I've ever read. There were a couple things about the writing style that kind of annoyed me. She had metaphors, and she would just say, you know, something is like something else, but she did it so frequently that it was really noticeable. And I'm not really too picky about writing styles, but, you know, I definitely was like, well, I shouldn't be noticing this too much. Like, it shouldn't really be something that I'm thinking about. But she had that so frequently. But yeah, ultimately I was just like, can you find other ways to describe things instead of using that same sentence structure over and over and over again? She also kind of gives you a tidbit of why, relatively early on, gives you a tidbit of why Celine left New Orleans. And it's definitely a moment of like, I'm gonna drop this one piece of information to kind of give you a little bit of a hook so that you keep reading to kind of find out more details. But she drops that hook in the same way many times, probably at least 4 or 5 times before you get any more details. And it's fine to kind of give that hook and then come back to it later in the book. But, you know, by the 3rd or 4th time, I'm like, yeah, we know. Like, you've said that before. We know that tidbit of information. You don't need to say that bit of information again. Like, we're waiting for you to describe more. Like, it's fine. You don't need to do that over and over and over again. We get it. I don't know. And it's just a couple of small things that ultimately didn't, you know, impact my overall enjoyment of the story, but just were little things here and there that was just like, ah, I don't know. Celine is definitely a character that you want to yell at sometimes, but ultimately it was kind of a fun, angsty story, and the atmosphere I think was definitely the best part of this book. 1870s New Orleans, it was awesome. Like, her writing this atmosphere was definitely really, really, really cool. So that was probably the thing I enjoyed the most, and kind of held some of the other things that maybe weren't my favorite and still kind of propelled me forward to keep reading. So overall, enjoyable. Again, not anything that's gonna, you know, knock my socks off, but I still will probably continue in the series and, you know, hopefully enjoy it. But you know, and maybe when I'm in the mood for something like this, you know, I can definitely see myself rereading it. And, you know, if you're in the mood for a YA, angsty, atmospheric historical fiction thing with a murder mystery and a taste of paranormal, like, it was fun. Pick it up. So the only thing that I've read that I do not have a physical copy of is Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. I listened to the audiobook of this one, and I enjoyed the female, so there are chapters from both perspectives, of Josh and Hazel's perspective, and I loved the female narrator. I didn't particularly like the male narrator, but I didn't dislike him enough to not listen to the audiobook. And so it follows Hazel, and Hazel is one of my favorite characters ever. I love her so much. This book was so funny. I was laughing out loud the entire time. So Josh and Hazel met in college, and it follows them sometime later when they meet again, and through circumstances kind of become friends and need to be physically close to each other for a period of time. And so of course, you know, they get closer and closer, and like, spoiler alert, like things happen between them. And so them not dating and being friends like ultimately leads to more. And they're trying to, so at first they very much are on the train of, we're just gonna be friends, it'll be great, like we are not meant for each other at all. And they actually start suggesting, you know, friends of theirs that the other person should date. And so they go on these series of double dates. And of course none of them work out. And their dates start realizing that really they should be together. And they're like, why did you bring us on this double date when clearly y'all are the ones that should be dating? And yeah, that's the whole premise. And it's delightful. I had such a good time listening to this, and I actually want a physical copy just to highlight all of the hilarious lines throughout this book. Oh my god. So the only things that made me kind of cringe a little bit, so the spoiler alert, they have sex, whatever. And the first 2 times they have sex, well, the first time they're both drunk. The second time, she has just had an incredibly emotional, like negative emotional experience, and she's still kind of in a bad headspace from that. And so maybe not the greatest circumstances for the 2 of them to have sex, but, you know, this book was still just so enjoyable that ultimately I didn't care. Oh, it was so good. Yeah, if you're looking for just a fun, hilarious, contemporary romance that is probably, I mean, I've only read one other Christina Lauren, and that was The Unhoneymooners. And I enjoyed this one more than The Unhoneymooners, and I still enjoyed The Unhoneymooners. But yeah, it's probably just a classic Christina Lauren, and if you have read some of theirs but haven't read this one, I think you'll probably really enjoy it. So that's everything I read in the last part of November. Be sure to subscribe below, and I'll also leave my Twitter and Instagram linked below. That's where I like to hang out. I'll also leave my climate channel linked below, and yeah, I'll be back in a few days with another Bookmas video. So until then, bye.